Frank Dawson sat in the back seat of the old SUV he'd rented at the airport, his hand clutching the small suitcase that now held nearly everything left of his life. The polished leather shoes his wife had once bought him for their 30th anniversary were now scuffed, dulled by time and grief. It had been less than a year since he lost her, and now he had let go of the house too, the one filled with laughter, piano music, and the smell of apple pie on Sundays. He had sold it to move in with his daughter Emily and her family, following a suggestion he thought came from love. The house in Louisville looked like any other suburban home. 2 stories, neatly trimmed lawn, and an American flag waving from the porch. As the car stopped, Frank looked up at the second-floor windows, hoping to see the grandkids rush out to greet him. But no one came. The door opened. Emily stood there, giving a forced smile. "Hi, Dad," she said, stepping aside to let him in. Mark, her husband, didn't come out. He stayed in the kitchen, holding a coffee mug, watching silently. "You can leave the suitcase by the door," he said. "We cleared out the basement for you. It's cool and quiet." Frank nodded. "Thanks." The staircase leading to the basement smelled faintly of mildew. No windows, no kitchen, just a thin futon, a worn rug, a mini fridge, and a plastic chair beside a stack of folded blankets. Mark placed Frank's bag on the chair. "The upstairs bathroom is shared," he added. "But if you need it at night, please give us a heads up first, so you don't startle anyone." "Sure," Frank replied softly, forcing a smile, even as something sank in his chest. Dinner that night was mashed cauliflower and roasted chicken. The family sat around the table while Frank lingered near the kitchen counter. He reached for a bowl, but Mark looked up. "Could you ask first, Dad? We're trying to teach the kids about boundaries." Emily, still stirring the soup, chimed in without looking at him. "That's right, Dad. You're not a guest. We all live here, so we need to respect each other's space." Frank sat down without touching his plate. The spoon lay untouched as his appetite dissolved. A coldness deeper than the basement wrapped around him. That night, sleep eluded him. Every footstep above echoed in his mind. Memories of his late wife flooded his thoughts, the chemo sessions, the whispered goodbyes, the silent mornings after. She had held his hand near the end and said, "If no one stands beside you, go where you feel alive." Frank stared at the ceiling with no light fixture, eyes burning. Was this the place she meant? The days that followed were quiet, but not the comforting kind. In the Dawson-Bennett household, silence wasn't peace. It was pressure. Frank adjusted quickly to the routines of the house. Early breakfast for the kids, lunchboxes packed and set on the counter, and the hum of a dishwasher running by 8 a.m. Emily was always in a rush. Mark rarely acknowledged Frank unless something needed fixing. The kids, Ethan and Lily, smiled when they saw him, but their interactions were brief, like someone had told them to keep their distance. One morning, Frank went upstairs to get a glass of water from the kitchen. The kids were still asleep. The house was still. He opened the refrigerator and pulled out a carton of orange juice. Just then, Mark walked in, still in his gym clothes. "Hey," Mark said sharply, startling him. "Could you maybe ask before taking stuff from the fridge?" Frank blinked. "It's just juice." "Sure, but we do groceries on a budget. If everyone just helps themselves, things run out. We got a system." Frank held back the words on his tongue and simply nodded. "I understand." Emily walked in moments later, drying her hands with a towel. Her eyes flitted between the 2 men, sensing tension. "Mark's right," she said calmly. "It's just easier if we all check in about things like that. You're not a guest, Dad. You live here now, so we have to be mindful of boundaries." The words stung, not because of what they meant, but because of how easily she said them. As if years of sleepless nights, scraped knees, school plays, and college tuition could be reduced to a glass of orange juice and an unwelcome presence. Frank retreated back to the basement with his glass of water, leaving the juice untouched on the counter. That night, Frank sat alone on his futon, flipping through an old photo album. There was Emily at her fifth-grade recital, her dress too big, missing her front teeth. Her hand clung tightly to his. Now that same hand stirred soup without flinching while calling him a burden. The next day, the real blow came. Frank asked casually at breakfast, "You guys going anywhere for spring break?" Emily smiled politely. "We're heading to Destin. The kids are excited." "Oh," Frank said, hopeful. "I could tag along. I'll pay for my part, of course." Mark lowered his coffee cup. "We kind of need this as a family reset. Just the four of us." Emily gave a sad half-smile. "You understand, right, Dad?" He did, more than they thought. 3 days before they left, Frank noticed the pantry had a lock. The fridge had Post-it notes. "Lunches only, kid snacks do not open." He felt like a squatter in a place he used to call family. The night before the trip, Mark came downstairs with a duffel bag. "Just a heads up, we're taking both cars. Emily's friend will check in next week. If you need groceries, well, maybe use delivery or something. We'll leave some cereal downstairs." They took the car keys. They left the cupboards locked. They didn't leave a goodbye hug. Frank sat at the bottom of the basement stairs for a long time after the door slammed shut. He wasn't angry. He was empty. He thought of his wife again. Her laugh. Her last words. The first night alone in the house felt quieter than any night Frank had ever known. Not the peace of solitude, but the kind of silence that screamed. The only sound came from the hum of the mini fridge and the occasional creak of the pipes. No footsteps above. No laughter. No reminder that he was part of anyone's day. By the second day, he had eaten the stale cereal Mark had left behind and drank tap water from the bathroom upstairs when he dared venture out. The fridge and pantry remained locked. The air felt heavier, and the chill of the basement sunk into his bones. On the third morning, Frank stared at himself in the bathroom mirror. His eyes, once gentle and light, were now dulled by exhaustion. He looked forgotten. That's when he made the decision. Back in the basement, he pulled out an old shoebox he had tucked into his suitcase. Inside was a folded envelope with his wife's handwriting on the front, "For when you feel alone." It held 3 $100 bills, a small emergency fund she had put together during her treatments, just in case life threw him somewhere dark. He smiled through a welling tear. "Looks like now's the time, darling." Frank wrote a note and left it folded neatly on the futon. "Don't worry about me. I've decided to stop being a burden. Take care of the kids. Dad." He packed his small suitcase again and left through the side door before the sun fully rose. Frank checked into a modest roadside motel with wood paneling and worn carpets. The front desk clerk looked surprised when Frank asked for a room for a few nights, maybe longer. He paid cash and collapsed onto the stiff bed, for the first time in weeks not worrying whether someone would question his presence. That night, he ordered a warm meal, nothing fancy, just meatloaf and mashed potatoes. It tasted like kindness. It tasted like freedom. The next morning, Frank called his financial advisor. His wife's life insurance had come through months earlier, but he hadn't touched a cent. Not because he didn't need it, but because he didn't know who he was without her. Now, maybe he had a reason to find out. Within 2 weeks, Frank had bought a small duplex in a working-class neighborhood on the edge of town. The house was modest but clean, with sunlight that poured into the kitchen each morning. He chose to live in one half and rent the other half out, but not for profit. One day, he saw a woman sitting on the curb outside the grocery store with 2 young boys, trying to tape up a torn backpack. Her name was Rachel Moore, and her kids were Aiden and Luke. She looked tired but proud, eyes filled with quiet defiance. Frank offered her a ride. Later, he offered her a home. "For how much?" she asked, suspicious. $1 a month, he said simply, "and help me keep the place tidy." She blinked. "You don't even know me." I know what it feels like to be somewhere you're not wanted, he said. Let's not make this one of those places. Rachel and her boys moved in the following week. The sound of laughter returned to Frank's life, not from a memory, but from the other side of the duplex wall. On Sunday morning, they invited him over for pancakes. Aiden spilled syrup on the floor, and Rachel apologized, embarrassed. Frank just laughed. It's not a mess. It's proof someone's living. Frank stood at the kitchen counter, flipping pancakes while Aiden and Luke zoomed around the dining table with cardboard swords. Rachel was laughing from the sofa, her hair still damp from the shower. There was flour on the floor, syrup already on one chair, and sunlight pouring through the window. Chaos, joy, life. When he sat down, the boys clambered into their chairs, and Rachel handed him a mug of coffee with a shy smile. Best coffee I've had in years, he said. You say that every morning, Rachel teased. He did, and it was true every time, not because of the taste, but because of what it meant. He wasn't alone. Later that afternoon, Frank's phone buzzed. Voicemail from Mark Bennett. He debated not listening, but curiosity got the better of him. Frank, we just got back. Emily's been worried sick. You left a note like you're some kind of victim. Look, we didn't kick you out. You walked away, and I don't appreciate having to explain to the kids why Grandpa vanished. We gave you a roof. You should be grateful. Anyway, if you're ready to talk like an adult, call me. Frank didn't move for a long time. The phone sat on the table like a stone. Rachel walked in, drawing a plate. Everything okay? He nodded slowly. That was my son-in-law. He thinks I owe him. She raised an eyebrow. Do you? Frank smiled. Not bitter, not angry, just quietly at peace. No. That evening, after Rachel and the boys had gone next door, Frank sat at the table with his old photo album. One page held a picture of Emily as a baby, swaddled in his arms. Another showed his wife, hair short from chemo, leaning into him on their porch swing. He ran his fingers over the faded edge. They had lived so much together, and now he was building something new, not to replace the past, but to honor it. He stood, took out his phone, and snapped a photo. Rachel and the boys were on his porch, Luke holding a crayon drawing of his super grandpa, Rachel waving from the steps. He attached it in a message. No caption, no explanation, just an image of something simple and sacred. He sent it to Emily. She didn't reply, and that was okay. Some silences, Frank realized, are answers in themselves. That night, as rain began tapping against the windows, Frank sat in his reading chair with a blanket over his knees, a book open and a dog-eared photo of his wife tucked into the inside cover. He didn't feel forgotten. He didn't feel like a guest. He felt home. Frank Dawson woke up to the smell of toast burning and the sound of little feet thudding on hardwood floors. It was Saturday. In his old life, Saturdays were for yard work, coffee runs, and pretending everything was okay. Now they were for giggles, pancake experiments, and feeling useful again. He pulled on his slippers and opened the front door. Luke was on the porch with a magnifying glass, inspecting an anthill. Careful, Frank said with a smile. They're stronger than they look. So are you, the boy replied, without looking up. Frank blinked. That was something his wife might have said. The rest of the day passed in small, golden pieces. Rachel tending to her garden box, Aiden drawing chalk murals on the driveway, Luke chasing butterflies with a jar. Frank fixed a broken hinge on the back gate, then sat with a sandwich on the steps, watching the sky shift towards sunset. His phone buzzed. Emily, Dad, I saw your photo. The kids miss you. I wasn't kind. I'm sorry. He read it once. Then again. He didn't reply, not out of anger, but because peace, once found, should not be risked on a maybe. That evening, Rachel knocked on his door with a small chocolate cake. Got the new job, she grinned. Administrative assistant. Not much, but it's ours. Frank beamed. We should celebrate. They set up paper plates and tiny candles. Aiden played music from his mom's phone, a silly pop song Frank didn't recognize but danced to anyway. The boys laughed until they cried. When Rachel blew out the candles, Frank made a wish too, quietly, to himself. Let this last. Let this be enough. Weeks passed. One morning, Frank received a letter, thick envelope, embossed seal, from an attorney in Mark's firm. It was a formal notification. They were selling the family home. Emily and Mark were moving to Colorado. No mention of Frank. No apology. No invitation. He placed the letter in a drawer. Then he wrote one of his own. Dear Emily, I hope Colorado is beautiful. I hope your kids grow up kind. I hope you never feel what I felt that winter. But if you do, if silence becomes your answer, if doors close when you need them most, then remember, love should never come with locks. I'm okay now. I really am. With all my heart. Dad, he didn't send it, but he folded it neatly and tucked it into the photo album, right next to the picture of her in pigtails, laughing in a pumpkin patch. Months later, neighbors knew him not as the old man in the duplex, but as Grandpa Frank, the guy who taught kids how to fix bikes, bake bread, and plant tomatoes. Peace hadn't come free. It had cost him comfort, pride, even the illusion of family. But in return, it gave him something rare and sacred, a life he chose. A life that chose him back. It had been exactly 1 year since Frank Dawson walked out of the basement. 1 year since he left behind the hushed judgments, the locked fridge, the echoing silence of forced cohabitation. 1 year since he stopped waiting to feel like part of family and began living like someone who belonged to himself. And he remembered the date, not because it marked a tragedy, but because today, like back then, the forsythia bushes outside his porch were in full bloom. Grandpa Frank, Aiden shouted, bursting through the gate with a backpack twice his size. Luke followed, struggling to carry a lopsided science project shaped like a volcano. They're here. Rachel called from the duplex other side, half laughing, half yelling as she tried to keep pace with them. I told them to knock first. It's fine, Frank said, stepping onto the porch. They live here too. No knocking needed. The boys dropped their bags and each hugged one of Frank's legs, their laughter rolling up the street. Frank looked down at them and smiled. The ache he once carried had been replaced with something far quieter, but infinitely stronger, contentment. Later that afternoon, Frank sat in his usual chair, sipping tea, while Rachel helped the boys paint small birdhouses in the backyard. The sun was low and golden, casting long shadows over the grass. It was the kind of day where nothing spectacular happened, and that made it perfect. He picked up the local paper from his lap, flipped past the sports section, and stopped at the community events page. A photo caught his eye, a farewell to the Bennetts article celebrating Mark and Emily's move to Boulder, Colorado. Frank stared at the picture. Emily looked tired. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. He hadn't heard from her since the message months ago, the one where she said she was sorry. He'd never replied. Maybe she hadn't expected him to. 2 days later, on a quiet Tuesday morning, someone knocked at Frank's door. Not Aiden, not Luke, not a neighbor. A real, deliberate knock. Frank opened it slowly and froze. Emily stood there, hands clasped, eyes rimmed red. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but as if some invisible weight had pushed her inward. Hi, Dad. Frank didn't say anything at first. He stepped back to let her in. She hesitated, then crossed the threshold like it was foreign ground. Can I sit? She asked. He nodded toward the chair across from his. She took a breath. I'm not here to fix anything. I need to say a few things. Frank said nothing, not out of coldness, just readiness. Emily looked down at her hands. Mark left 3 months ago. Said he was done trying to make me choose between him and my guilt. Said I wasn't the same after you left. Frank's face didn't change, but his heart tightened. I thought he was right, she continued. For a long time, I believed the stories he told me, that you were passive-aggressive, that you were always judging us, that we were doing you a favor. Frank spoke softly for the first time. And now, she met his eyes. Now I know you weren't judging us. You were surviving us. Silence stretched between them, but it was no longer sharp. I found your note, she said. It gutted me. And the photo you sent? I didn't reply because I didn't know how. It didn't look like a guilt trip. It looked like peace. Frank exhaled slowly. It was. Emily nodded. Her voice cracked. Can I ask something selfish? He raised an eyebrow. Can I come back sometimes? Just me. Not to live. Not to dumb my sorrow. Just to sit here. To be your daughter again, if there's space for her. Frank leaned back in his chair. The room was quiet except for the ticking clock and a child's laughter echoing faintly outside. You never stopped being her, he said finally. But yes, there's space. Always. From that day on, Emily visited every other Sunday. She never stayed long, and she never came empty-handed. Sometimes with a bag of peaches, sometimes just a book she wanted to leave behind. She didn't talk much at first. Sometimes she just sat on the porch beside Frank, watching the boys chase fireflies, asking simple questions like, "What are you reading?" or "How's Rachel's job?" Over time, her presence stopped being awkward. It became normal. And one Sunday, after Rachel brought over a blueberry pie and Aiden shouted, "Mom, come try this," Emily stepped into the backyard without invitation. Rachel blinked in surprise. Then she smiled. That was the first time Emily said hi. 6 months later, the duplex felt less like two homes and more like one. On the anniversary of Frank's wife's passing, he lit a candle on the porch. Emily came by without being asked. She brought a photo, her favorite of Mom smiling at the lake. They sat in silence. Mom would have liked this place, Emily said. Frank nodded. She would have liked Rachel. Emily smiled faintly. She would have told me off years ago. Frank chuckled. She tried. You weren't ready. I wasn't, Emily admitted. They sat there as the candle flickered against the dusk. That fall, Frank built a bench from reclaimed wood with Luke and Aiden. They carved initials into the back. FD plus RM plus A plus L, Frank, Rachel, Aiden, Luke. Emily came over a few days later and saw it. She traced the letters with her finger, then added one small E in the corner. Frank didn't say a word. He just smiled. One quiet winter night, with snow dusting the porch and cocoa steaming in mugs, Rachel leaned over to Frank and said, "You've built something rare, you know." Frank looked around. The boys were asleep on the couch, curled into each other like puppies. Emily was putting another log on the fire, humming quietly. "It's not perfect," he said. "It doesn't need to be," she whispered. "It's real." He squeezed her hand gently. "That's enough." Frank Dawson never got the apology he thought he wanted. He got something better, understanding without words, forgiveness without begging, and family rebuilt not from duty, but from choice. He never returned to the basement, because this time he built a home, and this time they came knocking.